All right, Joey Clark. This is our first hangout. I hope the first of many, right?
Oh, absolutely. I would hope so.
Yeah. What are we doing? Not doing this all the time? It's just crazy.
Yeah, I think we're just way too ahead of ourselves.
Let me turn off that sound. So the news is going a little bit nuts these days, and you keep up with it, I think, a little bit better than I do. This week we had the big National Review attack on Trump, which was greeted with a lot of ridicule by Trump people, but I think probably stemmed from, a fairly decent instinct on the part of many of the contributors. I'm not entirely convinced that it, represented some sort of terrible evil, although, well, let me ask you, what are your thoughts about that?
I found it was too little too late in many senses of the word. And I think some of the people's motivations are perfectly fine. For instance, I've long listened to Glenn Beck. I think Glenn Beck over the years has become more serious about his faith and leans in the libertarian direction. And he sees Trump clearly as the authoritarian Trump is. But then I look at some of the other critiques, and I think the only thing that unites these folks is being against Trump. So you look at Bill Kristol, editor for the Weekly Standard, notorious neoconservative. He comes out and says, he quotes Leo Strauss to begin with, and says Leo Strauss essentially claims conservatism is not being vulgar. So he then says, do we really want a president who is vulgar against the conservative tradition and who has this sort of two-bit Caesarism? Which I think about the source, I think about Bill Kristol, I guess. So what you're saying is you want a refined first-rate Caesarism, Bill? So there's a weird hodgepodge of these folks, and I find the only thing that unites them is being against Trump, which is a good thing. But other than that, these folks don't seem to have much of a coherent ideology that connects them, and thus probably the problem why Trump is doing so well.
Well, and there's something that sort of rubs me wrong about it too, which is that somehow they all just sort of gang up at once, all these disparate forces, and write 20 articles or 40 articles or whatever it is. That's going to somehow deal this deadly blow, which I don't really think the people are really in the mood for that kind of nonsense anymore. Actually, sort of we're powerful, we're influential, we've earned our keep, and now we're saying what's what. I mean, if anything, it sort of gives rise to the opposite impulse, which is the sort of screw you attitude.
Well, and I think these folks they think they're too powerful, or they're more powerful than they think they are. They essentially have failed to realize what democracy is actually about: winning and power and popularity. So you see Trump's response, and it's exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of these folks had very good critiques of Trump, similar to some of the critiques you've made of Trump. And Trump's response is, National Review, they're a dying magazine. Nobody reads them anymore. They're just looking for publicity. So he doesn't have to take on any of the intellectual points. He doesn't come out and say, oh, no, I am a true conservative, and cite each argument and respond to them. He just goes, oh, they're unpopular. They're just trying to bring us down because I am popular. Now get on the bandwagon with me. And he does this with everything. He doesn't have to respond to the actual argument. He just cites the polls and says, join the parade.
Yeah, the polls for him are a kind of a balance sheet, aren't they? It's like, look, I'm selling stuff. I'm in the black. You have no argument with me. And he treats the polls as just simply a double entry accounting.
Well, and I've found that often I will make arguments on talk radio, and this is, I unfortunately do know politics and the news very well because I cover this from sort of the right wing every day. And you find, even if I make an argument or the hosts I work with make good arguments, you ask the people who are listening, now give us back, regurgitate back what we just told you. It wouldn't be able to do it. And I would want to hope that some people could. But a lot of folks look at a focus group after Frank Luntz does a focus group after one of these debates. Listen to the people's rationale for why they like this candidate or that. It's not nuanced and well thought out. It's usually like, well, I like that guy. He sounds strong, or I liked how he presented himself, or I could see him behind the desk. These things unfortunately matter in democracy, especially our unique form of democracy here in America. but it's what happens at the end of the day. It's about a popularity contest. It's about winning.
Well, I've wondered actually for some time if reality TV and what are those shows that pit various entertainers against each other, you know?
Right. Well, like Trump's own Celebrity Apprentice.
Yeah, I wonder if people are a little confused. Like they think that politics, in a weird sense, matters so little to their lives that it has actually become a kind of a form of entertainment, a sort of a reality television. And cheer on this guy and cheer on that guy, and ultimately it doesn't really matter.
I think they're in ways oversaturated. That they've heard so many different polished politicians get up in front of them. They've heard all these poll-tested, focus group-tested words before. Even if an honest man somehow did get into politics, snuck into the political process, they wouldn't have any way to see them. So I tend to think they go with, what is my basic feeling? What's my basic emotion? And it's a cliche at this point, but they're mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore. We had a lady call in with this whole conservatives against Trump issue with National Review. And she goes, Joey, Greg, everything in that symposium, as they called it, was true. They're absolutely right about Trump. You know what? I don't care. I'm angry. And Trump's angry. And that, I think, is it in a nutshell, that folks are so tired of saying, oh, yeah, we made the right arguments, then we lose in the general election. Or, oh, we made the right arguments, get our people in there, then they don't do what we wanted them to do. I think it's just a general disappointment with the democratic system and as we have it in America. So it leads people to just go, what the hell? Let's try this guy. And
I agree with that. That there's a bit of a sort of a cynicism, even a nihilism. I mean, one I totally get. I kind of understand. Although it's what I don't think people really get is that whomever is going to be elected is going to be the most, as far as I understand it, the most powerful person in the world, apart from the chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah. Well, I wish they would be more honest. I would suggest folks who haven't seen it, you can find it on YouTube right now. Gore Vidal's The American Presidency. Now, you can't take Vidal as gospel, but he does look at the United States history, in particular the history of the presidency, as, oh my goodness, the founders had this great idea for a republic, a commercial republic that would be based on the ideas of liberty and democracy. But then they made one crucial mistake. They made the president the executive commander-in-chief, head of the armed forces. Till eventually, when there seems to be this crack up of the old republic, you get our first Caesar, Julius Caesar, Lincoln. And Lincoln, even there's quotes of Lincoln in it when he's my age, 27, one of his first public speeches where he talks about most men would be satisfied aspiring to the presidential chair. But does that sound like someone from the tribe of the lion or the eagle? Would this satisfy a Napoleon or a Caesar? No, new reapers will appear on the scene and they'll make something anew from what they've been given before. And out of that, you get our Julius Caesar in America. I tend to think when you look at Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Trump, or Marco Rubio, I just listened to Rubio's speech at the Council on Foreign Relations. What they're all modeling themselves after is America's Caesar Augustus, FDR. And they really, as much as we can talk about the ideas of these candidates, we're institutionally a bit boxed in as a people and as particular leaders. You have this structure. I think I've come, in my mind, crystal clear. America is an empire, maybe an empire in denial, maybe one that claims to be anti-imperial. It's an empire nonetheless. And most of our leaders find themselves modeling their policies and their rhetoric after the man who essentially consolidated and built the American empire, FDR.
Well, and let's be clear about National Review as a venue. I mean, after World War II, National Review has a very mixed message, right? So on one hand, they wanted to protect the free market and freedom and certain liberties, economic liberties, against the encroachments from the left. On the other hand, they very much wanted to get rid of that sort of interwar opposition to foreign interventionism. And in fact, they wanted to sort of reconstitute, I don't know what you would call it, the American right, into a kind of imperial force themselves, you know, with the war against communism. So it's a little difficult to take seriously, apart from somebody like David Bose, you know, who's a libertarian. The rest of them have well, I don't want to say the rest. I mean, there are probably other exceptions in there. I mean, you've got some of the younger National Review writers who were skeptical of the Iraq War and so on. But for the most part, National Review's legacy has been to build a case for Caesarism of the sort you're referring to.
In many senses, and this is listening to that Rubio speech on the Council of Foreign Relations, and Rubio will make a nice little, shiny-faced emperor for the United States. He'll do a grand job, I'm sure.
But you can't just keep attacking every single person here. I mean, this is one of the things that disturb me about many of the essays. I mean, like Glenn Beck says, look, Trump's terrible. He's like a Mussolini. He's not a conservative. He's dreadful. We should be supporting Cruz.
Right.
And so that's like, okay, wait a minute. Like every time some alternative to Trump comes up, I think, oh God, geez, that's not really an alternative. These are just different forms of the same thing.
Well, I think they are different forms of the same thing, but then I think America is an empire. One of the gentlemen had asked Rubio a question in the Q&A at this Council on Foreign Relations meeting is Neil Ferguson. I have his book right here called Colossus, and he makes the case for America being a good empire, a liberal empire, and he defends the British Empire, and I can't go with him there. But the beginning of the book is fascinating because he talks about America as an empire in denial, and that you had FDR saying building and inheriting the British Empire out of a sort of anti-colonial, anti-imperial sense. He says, we don't want to be the British, but he takes it up, at least what he claims. Also, at National Review, you get these folks who talk a big game about free markets, individual liberty, personal rights, but then they say we need a Leviathan here at home in order to fight the Soviet empire, the Soviet Leviathan abroad. So again, it's empire building in the name of being anti-imperial. And I think what's happened is there are some people who actually seriously believe anti-imperialism is a good thing, even to the point where you shouldn't build your own empire in the name of being anti-imperial. And there are others who realize, oh, that's the rationale that we give to folks in order to build up this strong military and dominate the world. And of course, you'll never hear any of the candidates talk about it in terms of empire. You'll hear them talk about it, as Rubio, I just heard, said strength, or you hear Cruz and others say leadership. And they always say, we reserve the right to use military force to defend Americans, and here's the big hairy butt around the corner, and American interests. So they leave the door wide open. They just know Americans won't accept true blue imperial rhetoric. They won't accept this is the white man's burden. Right. But I sort of see, but this is what's happening behind the curtain while they all jump ahead and say, they jockey amongst themselves. Oh, Cruz will be better than Rubio. Rubio will be better than Trump. I don't see a big difference between all of them.
Well, okay, let me ask you this. On that meta level, if you're just going to disregard the actual writings of all the National Review contributors, why do you suppose that the conservative establishment is so suspicious of Trump or so willing to toss him out this way? I mean, what do you think is really at the heart of the issue?
I think there's only so many seats of power. There's only so much space on the top of the hill. And a lot of these folks I realize if Trump got in, they would be on the outs. They wouldn't have the same access as they once did. Trump would not be listening to them to advise them on foreign policy matters. And I think Trump is a phenomenon based more on Drudge Report. There's always, in everything Trump says, there's a grain of truth. Where he says National Review is a dying magazine, it's not what it used to be. He might be onto something there, because you do have the Drudge Reports of the world. You do have much more social media based broadcasting that Trump really does better than anybody else. So I think these folks, the establishment in particular, is nervous basically about losing power. I don't think it's just sort of a cynical, oh, I must hold on to my power. I think they really believe in, oh, we want to build a global liberal order. They really believe in these things. Like I listened to Hillary Clinton. I think she really believes in what she's saying. But they see Trump as upsetting that, completely upsetting all the work they've done.
Yeah, and they have been at work essentially for more than half a century. but cobbling together this strange hybrid called American conservatism, which, as far as I know, was a term that sort of really did find it was a sort of neologism that came about after the Second World War II. And you recently watched this documentary from the 1964 presidential debates. I forget now which ones they were. Called Best of Enemies. You know,
it's 68.
68?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it struck me while I was watching that. This is a documentary that chronicles this sort of ongoing debate between Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley. And you and I were talking one night, who do we sort of cheer on? Who is our favorite? And it's a difficult thing because I want to be sympathetic with Buckley because I have affection for him, dating from essentially my initial ideological awareness, when I was very young. But you hear him, and on one hand he says, look, Mr. Vidal, we don't believe in socialism because we believe in this thing called freedom. And you're like, awesome. That's awesome, dude. I'm with you. And then you just turn a little bit a few minutes later, and he's calling for the police to crack down on protesters in the streets,
Right.
And then Vidal quotes him as calling for the nuclear war against Russia and Vietnam at the time, right? So and Buckley is put in an awkward position of not being able to deny it. So you realize this guy, who has a kind of liberally minded attachment to the idea of economic freedom, and good for him, is on the other hand, tightly wedded to the police state and even to a kind of a globalist, program of essentially mass murder. So it becomes very difficult. And then on the other hand, you've got Gore Vidal, who's all in favor of civil liberties and cultural freedom and freedom of expression and freedom of speech and all the rest of it, and is against international war. But repeated calls for a gigantic government at home to confiscate everybody's wealth and redistribute it and so on. So it gets very frustrating. It's like, where do these ideologies come from? I mean, they seem to be, in many ways, truly just cobbled together.
They do. And as you were just describing it, it made me realize nothing has changed. The sort of debate those two men were having is the exact debate a Trump and Bernie Sanders would have. They almost, I think, sometimes our two-party system brings out this weird hodgepodge of ideology, as you put it together, these ideologies sort of cobbled together. I wonder, why is it that you find culturally, I find myself more in line, and by culturally I mean more in terms of his ideas on sexuality, his ideas on free thought in many ways. I like Vidal. And also Vidal's sort of take on American history. He's not afraid to look at America from a sort of afar position and say, oh, maybe the United States isn't exceptional. Maybe it's just like any other people ever before. So I appreciate that perspective, but then I can't stand Vidal's sort of populism that verges on violence. It says, there's one line where he says, if you don't give the people what they want, they will come and take it from you.
Yeah.
But then, of course,
there is a kind of Robespierre quality too.
Yeah. But then you do get Buckley saying, oh, the police in Chicago should have done that because I heard these slurs and these naughty words out my window, right. out of my window. I'm like, man, again, and this is exactly what we're fighting today, is two people on both sides who have good disagreements that I could find myself on either side of. But at the end of the day, they both want to use organized violence.
Yeah, two brands of authoritarianism, on the one hand, and two brands of libertarianism on the other. I mean, this is what's frustrating. But you know what, Joey, I'm sure this occurred to you. Is it only libertarians who think this way? I don't understand why everybody just doesn't look at this and go, well, we've got some fundamental inconsistencies here.
I think it is. Yeah.
I mean, is it just you and I who see that? I mean, I can't even believe this. These are not coherent ideologies these people are speaking. Actually.
Well, I think you'll find with your average man or woman on the street, they'll quickly admit, I have no idea what I'm talking about, or I am inconsistent. I have a job. I have a wife and kids. I'm working on this stuff. You get to do this every day and cover it, Joey. How dare you talk down to me for not knowing as much as you? So a charge of elitism is thrown at me. But at the end of the day, they're able to go, my vote, it matters just as much as yours. So I don't care if I'm inconsistent. I don't care if what National Review said about Trump is true. I'm going to vote how I want because I can. And maybe this is why there's such an inconsistency, is the folks who run the parties understand in order to cobble together these coalitions, you can play on different parts of the population and the culture to get them to come your way. What the interesting thing about Trump might be that he upsets the two coalitions that have existed. He might very well pull in more Black Americans to vote for a Republican than ever before, which is amazing to me. But he very well may. I think his message to the sort of working class really upsets the current fight and divide that's been going on. And then his brashness, his sort of authoritarianism up to this point where he said over the weekend, if I went out on Fifth Avenue and shot somebody, I wouldn't lose supporters. He did say that. And so I think, sort of upsets this. This is why Trump as a phenomenon is quite fascinating and entertaining, scary in other ways if you think about the future.
Well, how much do you think? I suppose it a lot comes down to what the conclusion of this is going to be. But what's your estimate on how much impact Trump is having on the American political rhetoric and the conventional wisdom in terms of politics? I mean, you said at the beginning of this hangout that before Trump there was a kind of a script that everybody adhered to, and you get this sense, right, when you watch the debate. Everybody sort of finally honed their message. They know exactly how to say things in a way that keeps them out of trouble with the mainstream media, and yet, sends the right signals to the supporters. It's all very sort of a delicate ballet. And then Trump just shows up and just, says whatever he wants. And, then he sort of wins. I mean, what could be the effect on American politics as a result of this?
I think there is a possibility, like anything, it's a possibility of it being very good. I personally find this is the only thing I like about Trump. I do not like political correctness, but I'm also wary that once you upset, and this is the bad side of it, some people confuse saying something politically incorrect and brash and rude as being true. And that's the danger, that you can just make whatever worlds you want in your own mind, say, screw you, buddy, get out of my way, I'm going to do it. And that can be a big problem, tends towards authoritarianism.
Well, that's right. And this is actually, you're speaking to the thing that has worried me from the beginning of Trump. Many people have criticized me for being so critical of Trump, but in many ways I'm trying to think beyond, the present political moment and trying to examine what this could mean. I mean, we do see in history societies where there's a great deal of political cynicism combined with sort of economic frustration, and a left wing that sort of pushes too far, that prompts this blowback that results in a kind of a wicked, fascism. Not that the left doesn't deserve what's coming to it, but the blowback is in many ways can be even worse. So this, in all my writings, I've been trying to stay like a step ahead of history here.
It can, and I almost see Donald Trump he's just building on people that have come before him. The cult of personality aspect really reminds me of Barack Obama.
Yeah, that's true.
It really does. Obama was, of course, aspirational and hope and change, and we're going to get rid of lobbyists and transparency.
But you're right. There was a kind of a cult, though. There was a sense that if we just elect this guy, all our dreams will come true.
And that's part of that. I can listen to some of the former Reagan devotees. I've actually heard some of them refer to it as a calling, as though they're being called by God in some ways. And they think back to the Reagan days, and people say, I got into politics because of Reagan. So there's an element of this whenever there's a great leader, so to speak. I think where it's dangerous with Trump is that it's so personal. If you make any slight, make any critique, no matter how true, what he immediately does is, at least Obama had the decency to sometimes take on arguments. What Trump will do is say, screw you, buddy. You're not popular enough to even be talking to me. He's bringing, you know, at least you would think if you're going to have a people with a sort of classical liberal mindset, at least we might admit, okay, we need a boss for a little while. We need a leader for a little while. But that leader better not ever claim that they're somehow superior to us. Trump is doing this, oh no, I am superior. I am better. And follow me. I'll make the country great again. And if you criticize me, well, you're not even good enough to kiss my feet. That makes me nervous. But again, the left deserves what's coming to them. The fact that Trump, this is how, let's recount a little bit, like what he has said. John McCain, we had a comedian, Lewis Black, come to Montgomery. And the opening act was funnier than Lewis. But the opening act guy says, what's happened with this Trump thing? John McCain, by most people's standards, is a hero. No matter what you think of war or Vietnam, the man was shot down, refused to sign a piece of paper that would have given away his fellows, but he didn't, and he was tortured for it. Most people consider him a hero. Trump comes out and goes, yeah, I like people that weren't captured. I like heroes that weren't captured. And he goes up in the polls. He then insults Megyn Kelly to her face, and then a day later on a CNN interview says, oh, I don't know what was wrong with that woman. She had blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever. I'm listening to that going, oh, that's going to hurt him. No, he goes up in the polls. He said Hillary Clinton got schlonged in 2008. I thought it was hysterical, but you think Hillary running as to be the first female president, playing the sexism card against any of her opponents, that would have been a gift to her if anybody else had said it. But no, Trump says she got schlonged. She comes back and tries to suggest Trump is sexist. And he goes, you're going to call me sexist? Your husband's he's cheating with every woman in this country. Not only is he cheated, he's been accused of rape. So get out of here with talking to me about this stuff. And it's a sort of angry politics that reminds me of where I work every day. It reminds me of talk radio, where you can have great discussions and learn a lot. But at most of the time, it's people just pissed off. And it's more of a emotional and key kind of red flags, keywords that set people off. It has little to do with the actual argument and more to do with how you present yourself. And Trump taps into that perfectly.
Well, let me ask you this. What, so I can understand this, what do you suppose is the thing that triggered this sort of rise of anger to the point that people are just ready to throw everything and all civility out and just sort of say, give us an authoritarian boss to run the country? Is it economic frustrations? Is it cultural resentment? What else? Is it fear of the decline of American imperialism? I mean, what would you, if you're going to sort of name one force that's giving life to all this, what would it be?
I think if it's all those things, and we could put it in a phrase: the decline of America, decline of American imperium. And I think a lot of it is, I would say the thing that sets people off the most is more, these are the sons and daughters, if not the grandchildren, of the so-called greatest generation, where there was, again, we go back to FDR or Caesar Augustus. And there was this, he brought the nation together, unified it, made it a dominant global power. And we could do anything. We could put a man on the moon. We can solve the poverty problem with the power of government. And as those projects have failed, they clearly have failed in many respects. And then you get in office a president who, I think race does play a portion of it. I can't tell you how many people I've had to dump from talk radio for saying some racist, excuse me.
Yeah, but I mean, I know that race is part of it, but sometimes I think that this race card is maybe not the cause. It just becomes a kind of symbolic thing. It's like,
yes.
When people get pissed, they're like, looking down and saying, who am I? I mean, this is sort of the way the Nazis came to power. It's like, the economy's failed, everything's failed. What am I in the end? What is ultimately true? I'm German, and so it is. I'm a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That seems to be the sort of white identity politics. But I just don't believe that in the end this is a racist movement so much as it is the there's somebody else that triggered it, and then race becomes like a kind of a vessel, to sort of carry forward the agenda.
Well, and I don't think it is a racist movement either. I think the race issue comes up more of, instead of bringing us together and bringing us to a post-racial point, it brought up race at every single moment. If you disagree with Obama, there's always the threat of somebody going, "You're a racist. You just don't like the president because he's black." That brings up a sort of anxiety with a lot of folks who oppose.
And that's been going on for basically 8 years, right? I mean,
oh yes,
people have been dealing with this for a long time, and it is annoying.
And so I don't think it's a racist thing, and I don't think it's the old signifiers like WASP. I think what's going on right now, I go back to the Greatest Generation. Obama did go around and apologize to countries. Obama really did accept that the reason we have a low standing of the world is America's done too much, and people will like us more if we have a humbler face and we apologize for our past sins. And that pisses a lot of people off. So what I come to is Trump is tapping into a sort of American as ethnicity. I consider myself an American because I love the founding documents, in particular the Declaration of Independence, and some of the stuff that inspired that. I don't really see myself, though, ethically, and I say that in sense of shared experiences.
Nationhood.
Nationhood, and that's what Trump is appealing to. It's what I don't think Barack Obama appeals to that much.
But Joey, don't you find it interesting? I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, this is a guy who doesn't quote the founding fathers.
Right.
He never recalls the Constitution. I mean, except for the Second Amendment, on which he happens to be correct, by the way. Yes. The devils do. And he doesn't talk about the Declaration. He doesn't talk about the vision of America as a free society. I mean, all this stuff is just like, it's not even part of his political rhetoric.
Oh, but he holds up the Bible and goes, the second greatest book in the world is The Art of the Deal. And the first by a long shot, the Bible, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's open to 2 Corinthians, as he said the other day.
Look, I'm sorry to say that just follows the fascist scripts down. I mean, I predicted that, like, night follows day. I mean, it started with the protectionism. We went to the immigrants. He talked about, and I thought, you know what? There's going to be a point in the next few weeks where he's going to use the Bible, and
right. Well, and it makes me think of a Seneca quote. The end of it, at least, rulers find religion useful, but. If you think about, you're right. Trump doesn't quote the founders. He doesn't quote the sort of classical liberals.
He doesn't talk about Madison, Jefferson. I mean, have these words ever passed? I mean, this used to be like standard conservative rhetoric,
right,
like a decade ago.
But think about who he does cite. He cites FDR. He cites Eisenhower.
He does.
He cites Truman. He cites all of our rulers since the Second World War.
And their worst aspects, right? The internment.
Yep.
Violations of civil liberties. He was praising FDR for forbidding Germans from using radios in World War II, which I didn't even know about, right? I mean, this is a level of like statist understanding that even was a surprise to me. I thought maybe it's probably in Robert Higgs' books or something. I didn't even know about that. I didn't know that Japanese weren't allowed to, or whatever he said, the Italians weren't allowed to talk on the telephone. Whatever he said.
Right.
I was like, what?
Yeah. And this is where I'm like, Trump sounds insane to me. And to most people who have gone through the last few decades of American politics, but he is tapping into something that is in the American tradition. It's been here a while. And you can, I think I was reading, there's an article on Cato I was reading, but also the historian Thaddeus Russell, where you can find praise from Mussolini, from Goebbels, for FDR's economic programs. I mean,
right.
We're not calling, I don't think FDR was a fascist in the style of Mussolini or a Nazi, clearly not a Nazi. But he did put people in internment camps. He did completely centralize the American economy, especially the wartime economy. And it's what I brought to the table, kind of to clear the table with initially, is that I listened to all these folks, especially on the realm of foreign policy. Like, they can say all they want. Institutionally, they're fairly constrained. And then in terms of the domestic and how they must appeal to the culture, that's changing a little bit. But, we're on this glide path. I have this worry. I hope I'm completely wrong. I'll maybe make that clear. A lot of the stuff I prognosticate, I hope I'm completely wrong. I just feel like we're a bit boxed in by the history that's come before us.
Okay, let me just make clear about your thesis here. You're talking about the greatest generation having a sense of like owning the world and being led by a great leader to do great things, and
Yes.
and America was great, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Greatest generation. We should abolish this word great. Now let me just ask you this: in your analysis of the demographics of Trump's support, do you find that they back your theory?
Yes, I think that's exactly what a lot of the working class wants. I think it's the sort of, instead of going back to the founding, I think what a lot of these folks watch is the History Channel and these constant reels of the Second World War and what the country has been about. And if you think about Reagan brought in the sort of nationalism and love of the military that was absent in the 70s. Of course, I'm talking about stuff before I was born, but that's the sense I get, is that he reinstilled this love of the military in the country. We're not going to spit on the military members or call them baby killers, what happened in Vietnam. We're going to make the military the biggest and baddest in the world. And we're going to say we're the shining city on the hill. And Trump is tapping into that model, but without the appeals to liberty. Like I have quotes with Reagan talking to William Buckley about, I think the heart of my philosophy is libertarianism.
Oh, sure. I mean, this is what's weirdly absent. By the way, it's not just Trump; it's all these guys, with the exception of Rand Paul. And by the way, everybody who's been putting down Rand Paul, I don't know, that ought to be a price to pay. I mean, look, he's not perfect or whatever, but I mean, he's the only intellectual. He's the only person with an attachment to something remotely like the liberal tradition of the founding fathers. Actually, I mean, he's the only one who answered a survey question about surveillance from. I mean, I just read it in the New York Times today. I mean, he's the only one who even cares about these issues. The rest of these guys don't talk about this.
And I have to give him credit there. I have been hard on Rand, but it's more for style and kind of grow some charisma and some sense of drama on the stage. I think that unfortunately matters the way things are done, but he's the closest to my ideals.
No,
so I can't knock him.
His absence at the most recent debate was felt very intensely, but
yes,
it is rather ominous that not even, I mean, it used to be standard fare in the Republican nominating process, the quotes in the Federalist Papers and I don't know, whatever, the founding fathers. I mean, this kind of, which, it was always sort of bluster and blather, really never really meant anything, but at least the symbolism symbolized something. Now that's just completely gone,
Well, and it seems to be, completely gone, because you get Trump asked point blank, where do you side, security or liberty? Without missing a beat. Oh, I hate it. I hate to do it, but I side with security. We have to stop these bad dudes, close down parts of the internet, little spying here and there, go after the families of these terrorists. Torture people
and their families. Yeah, that was an amazing comment. He can say anything, this guy. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any consequences to it whatsoever. People seem to be actually delighted in his screw-ups. Actually, it's the strangest thing.
Well, and I think it's, again, too little too late. There's a part of the Tea Party, and there's clearly with libertarians a true love of the founding in many respects, and moving beyond the founding to a much more, if we could at least get back to a sort of classical liberal philosophy that governs us, that would be a great start, and then go further more towards, I think, where you and I are, that'd be even better. But that it's happened much too late. It started around the crash of 2008. You get the Tea Party rising, and for a little while they seem like they're all about the founding. I mean, one of the guy led off the National Review piece, Glenn Beck. Again, Glenn Beck's the guy who made me want to get into radio. And it wasn't because of his religiosity. I'm quite secular. And so I respect it back for his sincerity and passion on that. But it was because he was talking about the founding. He was bringing people in to talk about Ayn Rand. I think there was even a show where he talked about von Mises. I mean, this was the stuff I loved. And he's only one man. And I just did have the thought, because you brought up Rand Paul. What would have happened if Ron Paul had been in this race? Just doing what he had normally done. I'm not saying he would have won, but I wonder how much support would have been taken away from Trump and thrown his way, because it seems like a good bit of former Paul supporters are on the sort of populist bandwagon.
It's true, more so than I even like to. In fact, this is a subject I was almost squeamish about bringing up, just because it's so personally mortifying to me. But yeah, there are many Paul supporters are now, all over Trump, despite Ron. I mean, Ron has given a series of broadcasts saying this guy he's basically, his message is anybody but Trump. He's an authoritarian. He's a would-be dictator. He believes in statism. I mean, Ron says this again and again and again. It's like, why aren't his followers listening to him? Actually, sometimes I wonder if his followers even ever did listen to him.
Right.
No, I mean,
Right.
the Ron Paul movement is one of the strange cases in the history of modern politics that I find strange. That where I mean, for the most part, like you look at the back of the old Taft movement, the Taftians were way better than Taft himself. But I always thought that Ron Paul was personally better than the Ron Paul movement, and like he was always sort of a genuine liberal.
Yes.
In the old sense, and yet his followers, there was always a little something funny going on at those rallies and the movement that backed him. And now it's just been unleashed, to this. I don't want to say it's universally a Trump movement, but there are huge pockets of it that are all over Trump and completely ignoring Ron's warnings.
Well, and that's where I come down. We've been talking about this, and I talk about it every day. But I have come to the point where I don't like this whole process. I question it at its basic foundations, because I look at all these folks, whether it's Bernie Sanders saying, I want to start a democratic socialist revolution, Hillary Clinton saying, I want to be a middle-class champion, give family care or family leave and daycare to every child and all this sort of stuff, or it's Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz or Trump. All of them seem to be, especially Trump, attracting just people who want to be part of something greater and aren't in any way sort of looking at ideas about how to change their personal lives and the community right around them. And it makes me nervous. And I must say, though, I got caught up being young. I got really caught up in the 2012 election saying Mitt Romney or anybody must beat Barack Obama. I was hoping Mitt Romney would win, and I would defend him on air and all this sort of stuff. This time around, I've made it clear to the audience at home. I'll make it clear here. And it's nice to actually have somebody else to join me, because in the description, it's really two people, not just one. Consider us, if I could, Jeffrey, like the two old men in the Muppet Show sitting in the upper balcony. That's my role these days. It's like, I don't like the show. The show's crap. Why am I even here? But I keep showing up. It's too much fun. And that's where I'm at, is that, and with that perspective, I look at people who were friends just last week, Ted Cruz supporters and Trump supporters, now rip at each other's throats out.
Yeah, isn't that just weird? I can't follow that dispute. But in many ways, what you're describing is a kind of it's not quite post-political, but it's very late political. I mean, so much of that. I read a poll in Newsweek the other day that actually polled not would-be Republican voters, which everybody polls all the time, but just like actual people, right? And it turns out that the Trump and Sanders supporters, like the fanatics who are like, yes, I'm going to love this guy, they're about 10% each. And most everybody else is like somewhere in the middle going, yeah, this is all just kind of nonsense, So the irony is that as we approach this sort of the end of the age of statism, you're still left with the state. So then you end up just with the fanatics who are like desperate to use this monstrous thing to kind of push their agenda forward, and it's always driven by hatred of their enemies. So it's like pillage the rich, punish the non-whites, or whatever the immigrants classes, or there's always some big statist agenda, and it seems like, and I don't know if this is going to be true for the rest of our lifetimes, that it's only the crazies who are dedicated to political organizing, and the rest of everybody's just doesn't believe it really matters and is sort of sitting out.
Well, and one thing I've noticed, I think you're right, it's a small part of the population, and they almost hit, whether they're the religious right or the secular socialist left, they hitch all their hopes and dreams to the political process. Makes me think about, I know you love the Hunger Games movies.
Yes.
And the first one, the Donald Sutherland character.
Yep.
He is asking his idiot son, why do we have a winner? And his son's like, oh, that's that a rhetorical question? What? No, seriously, why do we have a winner? And the son doesn't know what to say. He's, hope. A little bit of hope keeps people in line. And too much hope, we get overthrown. Too little, they revolt as well. You give them just the right amount of hope, and we can control them. And that's what I think our election process does. And the trick is to sort of talk to the people who are on these fringes and say, are you really that serious? There's another way. And it makes me think of people in the American tradition, in the classical liberal tradition, folks like Alexis de Tocqueville. There are ways of getting back to that very localized democracy, local communities that share a broader ideological.
I mean, thanks for bringing it up to Tocqueville. I read him within the last year again, and I was so inspired by just the old-fashioned liberalism of his vision. This is again one of those books like Road to Serfdom everybody talks about but nobody reads. But we need to get serious about our reading. And then speaking of reading, the Hunger Games is Aristotle's politics for our age, and I think there's so much truth in that story. But here, for a lot of, if you follow the movies, for two movies, you're sort of convinced of this Manichaean world where it's like the people versus President Snow, and you're happy with that. It's like the goal is to kill Snow. We've got to get rid of Snow. We've got to overthrow, the Capitol. If we can do that, then everything's gonna be safe. You get to the end of the third movie, you realize that things are a little more complicated. The people that have the strongest interest in overthrowing him also develop an attachment to the apparatus itself. Now you've got another problem. You've got coin, and so things get very complicated. And I think that's very much what we're headed towards with Trump and Sanders. I mean, people are just like down with the establishment, without recognizing that the person they're supporting is basically lusting for the same power that you resent so much.
Well, and they stay down with the establishment, but they more just want to change the players on the stage without changing any of the set, any of what the actual plot line is going to be. This is why I keep saying it seems like history or institutions have boxed us in. Yeah. Imagine even if you do get Rand Paul or an abolitionist button pusher like Ron Paul in the presidency. What are they going to do? They'd be better than the other folks, of course, but what are they going to do? And so I look at these anti-establishment folks, like you point out, and I say, are you really just mad at the people who are in there just to be mad at them, or do you want something done? There are some folks who will cite certain policies. For some reason, where I work, where I live, immigration just fires people up.
Yeah.
They're taking our jobs, that they're hiring foreign workers. They're making me train a foreign worker, then firing me. They're angry about their stuff. They're driving down my wages. And I first want to say to these folks, wait, I don't reveal too much that I'm secular, but I'm like, who gave us our rights? And they'll say, the Creator. Like, okay. Did the Creator stop endowing unalienable rights at the border? Well, Joey, that's not, we got to have a country. We got to have a border. We have to watch people that way.
Listen, I used to take the religious right a little bit seriously and their religious convictions. Yeah. After you see the polls and the number of these evangelicals that are supporting Trump, despite everything, in which we don't need to go into, I've lost, I mean, that's it. I just don't believe it anymore. I don't believe their motivations are really religious, actually.
Well, and I was thrown into hosting on Friday, and somebody brought up, I was like, we haven't talked about this in months, but the 1 hour I get to host on the Dan Morris show on News Talk, somebody wants to talk about abortion. Yay. And so I made the point of, okay, this is one of those particular issues where people on both sides will start crying. They'll start yelling at each other. Like, this is a very, very sensitive subject that I don't think even the most informed people on the subject really know what's going on, given how complicated that sort of procedure can be. So I said, way you deal with this issue is you actually sit down, maybe through a Google Hangout or over dinner, make friends with somebody first, figure out if you disagree on this. Okay, we do. and then actually have a soft-spoken conversation about it.
Hmm.
About it changed hearts and minds one person at a time. This guy came on air a minute after I say this saying, "Oh, hell no. No, we got to fight as Christians, and this country's going to hell if we don't stand up for God and his principles and all this." And he goes on this 5-minute, 6-minute rant, and I let him go. I, nicely said, "Thank you for, getting your passion out there. Hopefully the heat of your passion will enlighten us all." And then hung up on him. What I wanted to say was, what an immense display of Christian humility you have just shown us all. Thank you, sir. And this is my problem, not with Christians in particular, with all religious faith. I respect religious faith. I think I'm not like a Christopher Hitchens who's an anti-theist. I respect religious faith because I think of the beauty it's brought us, the music, the art, the community it's built. But when religion starts mixing with politics, or generally with state power, you can see it in Islam, you can see it in Judaism, you can see it with Christianity. The religion itself stops being about personal betterment and building true community, and it starts becoming about building the coldest of cold monsters, as Nietzsche would put it. And to be honest, I wish people would extend that Nietzsche quote more. He goes on to say, destroyers are the founders of states. They hang a sword and 1,000 cravings over a people and call it a state. And that is a beautiful and powerful imagery. That's exactly what's going on. You hang a sword and 1,000 cravings. It will suck up even the most religiously devout. It will suck up even the most in their everyday lives, private property loving, entrepreneurial, small business people. It will suck up everybody because they'll see, oh my goodness, that sword's right there. All these potential wonderful things are out there. And if I don't grab the sword, somebody else will. And that's where we are.
It's a beautiful summary. I'm sorry that we're out of time, Joey. It's just been amazing to talk to you. Yeah.
Likewise.
You want to do it again?
Yes.
I'd like
of course.
I appreciate your perspective very much. And again, Joey Clark, you've got a new fan page on Facebook, which everybody should go to. It's called it's Joey Clark.
Yes. And I look just about how I look right now.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe we can put this in the link for this thing. I would like everybody to go there and like your page and follow your work, because I think you've got amazing things to say, and I appreciate very much your friendship and your erudition tonight.
Likewise, Jeffrey. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Take care, my friend.